can speak. And so there you go. So welcome. Vishanka, welcome to you as well. My name is Ashley Weinberg. I was the first chair of the political psychology section in the British Psychological Society, and I'm standing in as chair today for this session for Professor Catherine Lido, who can't be with us sadly today. But we're going to talk about political skills in action, and we're going to focus on how that might play out in different arenas in our lives. Because as you probably all noticed, politics seems to be everywhere. And I don't just mean elections and general elections. I know there are a lot of general elections going on around the world and have been recently in India, in the United States. There's a presidential election coming up. Russia, we all know that was an interesting one as well. There's one happening in the United Kingdom, in case you hadn't noticed as well. So we're going to talk a bit about politicians. In fact, Joel is going to talk after me. We'll focus on local government and political motivations there. Antonio is going to say a bit as well about his perspective as a psychologist interested in political psychology areas, including climate change. And I'm afraid you're going to be stuck with me kicking things off, talking a bit about political skills as I see it, I guess, looking at some of the work that's been carried out by Rosamund Adukisi-Debrah, whose name may not be always familiar to you, but I think you will know her story and that of her daughter, Ella Roberta, which I'll endeavour to say a bit about. But if I may, I'm going to try and share some slides. And you never know. This is where I forget how to do everything that one's supposed to do on the internet. So here we go. Fingers crossed you can see this. Wonderful. Suzanne, would you give me a thumbs up and let me know if you can see anything on the screen there?
We can see your PowerPoint.
You can. And is that a good thing, do you think?
It's a good start.
It's a good start. And is it filling the screen or is it just a...
It's not. Can you see all of the slides?
I can see all of the slides, yeah. How about now?
Oh, perfect. All right. Big thumbs up.
All right, there you go. So for the purposes of recording and posterity, that's me. But I prefer to be called Ashley. I'll just have to put these things on here to let you know that I work for the University of Salford. And I guess the first question I want to ask all of you is, what does political really mean? Because it's a funny thing, isn't it? When you kind of start to get people to consider political skills, people go, well, I'm not actually political. You know, that's just something we see on politics with the big P, you know, on television. That's for politicians who get paid to do it. And I guess what I'm going to put to you is that actually politics with a small p is something we all do pretty much all the time. If you've spoken to someone this morning, I guarantee perhaps it was to communicate a particular message, request something, maybe promote some kind of change that's going on in your life right now. In other words, it was political. We tend to think of political as negative, bad stuff, Machiavellian, but it isn't. If you look at sort of definitions by people like Ferris and colleagues, it's actually about how we make it our business to understand what's motivating other people, and maybe to use that information to act in a particular way that promotes our own agenda. And I don't mean agendas that are necessarily negative, but they're just about how we get things done in everyday life. You know, if you've sent a text message to someone this morning, I guarantee it was probably just to check in with them that they're all right, and that suits you and your motivations to know they're okay. Or equally, it might be that you didn't respond to a text message, and I guarantee you might hear about that at some point if it's outside the usual parameters of your relationship. But if you talk about academic definitions of political skills, if it's useful, then this is the kind of thing. Are we tuned into other people? Do we have some ability to influence others? How good are we at networking with other people? And do we look as though we mean what we say? And I know, okay, do we look as though we mean what we say? Is that a good thing? Surely we should mean what we say. There's a photograph there of two people who are very good at sort of giving off those kind of vibes, I guess, who were photographed helping one another out. Apparently the gentleman had got lost at some convention or other. But if I may, I'm going to sort of reinforce this idea that political skills can be good for us. And I'm going to talk a bit about how that can work in practice. It's about communication. And if you're interested in psychology or promoting change in any area that involves whatever discipline you work in, whatever your job is, it's about using political skills in some kind of way. But as I readily admit, we'll all avoid saying it's political. this is a table, and I suppose when you're involved in a webinar, it's a good idea to show some kind of graphic of some sort, and that's not the most interesting one you've ever seen. But what those three columns are designed to do is to, on the left-hand side, give an idea of if you're in a workplace, for example, whether you're perhaps in the higher echelons of the hierarchy, or maybe not so high up in the hierarchy. If indeed a hierarchy exists, there are different particular political goals you might be aiming at. And in the second column, you can see some behaviors that might go with those. So, for example, if we look at, I don't know, getting politically active, that doesn't necessarily mean running out there with leaflets, but it might mean that you're promoting some kind of change at work, maybe to have a new water cooler, or maybe that everyone can have rights to use particular bits of the building. And how do you share those ideas with other people? The way you go about it will be some kind of political activity in some kind of way. But imagine for a moment you have a different size goal, and let's talk about that. This is a photograph of Ella Roberta Adu-Kisi-Debrah, a young lady who sadly died shortly after her 9th birthday 11 years ago. And she was the first person in the United Kingdom to have air pollution registered as a cause of death on her death certificate. The coroner ruled that she had indeed been exposed to excessive levels of air pollution before she died, specifically those originating from nitrogen dioxide and traffic pollution. She lived very close to a major road in London. It's estimated in London alone, a number of children are dying each year, and this figure will be higher around the UK, because London, would you believe, is not the most polluted city in the UK, according to charities like the Woodland Trust. In fact, Swansea and other parts of the southeast, so it's across the sort of south of the country, we're finding areas of intense pollution affecting children's health. But also we're finding, in addition to these tragic outcomes, additional outcomes for health that include impact on our psychological health as well. And according to Newbury and colleagues who published their study in the British Journal of Psychiatry, and I've included some references at the end, they're actually finding increased admissions and increased problems that persist over years linked to exposure to high levels of particulate pollution. And these findings have been replicated in Italy. So Rosamund Adu-Kisi-Debrah is Ella's mum, and who, as it happened, I interviewed her recently for a special issue of The Psychologist, did indeed study psychology herself. I didn't know this before we spoke. And her work since the death of Ella has been to campaign for clean air. And you might think, well, surely we wouldn't need to campaign for clean air. In the same way, perhaps in the UK, as we know, we shouldn't have to campaign for clean water. But what we're finding is that, yes, the things that we should perhaps take for granted are not things we can take for granted. And Rosamund's work has involved her sort of gaining as much support as she can for promoting the idea that we have a problem and that clearly we need to do something about that problem, and looking into the research around that. She's tried to garner support from a number of well-known figures, and at the moment she couldn't be here with us today because she's actually in Austria with Arnold Schwarzenegger at the conference he convenes around climate change on an annual basis. Rosamund didn't start off knowing Arnold Schwarzenegger or being in this position, and it was a situation thrust upon her on the death of her daughter. But what she told me, and what I learned from the interview, and there's a link to that if you want to find out more about how she's gone about the work she's been doing, is to raise awareness. In fact, the day I interviewed her a few months ago, she had been out in the park gaining signatures on a petition, because in the UK, if you get up to a certain number, I think it's 10,000 signatures, you can trigger a debate in Parliament to discuss a new bill, whatever it might be. And for Rosamund, and for many others now, it's about a clean air human rights bill, hopefully something called Ella's Law, to ensure, as she says, no child in this country will die from asthma. Some of these things may shock you, they may be news to you, but either way, what it shows is that as one person, it's possible to generate a whole movement around things in a way that promotes positive change. And this involves political skills in the nicest possible way. So I guess I'm going to ask you, what's your move and what's your feeling in response to that? If you're not familiar with the issues I've raised, perhaps you're looking back on this as a recording, or whether you're here right with me now, will you look on the website maybe? Will you read what Ella's Foundation has been doing? Will you perhaps start to tell others what you've learned? Will you think about changing your behavior? Maybe, and I passed a young gentleman today who's sitting with the car window up. It's a roasting hot day where I am in the north of England. His engine's running. He's sitting there. I don't know. Is he charging his mobile phone? Sometimes I knock on the window. I wouldn't always recommend it and just ask, why have you got your engine on? If you don't mind me asking, it's your choice, obviously. But should it be something we start to think about as just one example of maybe changing our behavior to reduce emissions that lead to pollution? If you look at the Woodland Trust and their work as well, they are quoting research showing that where more trees, more greenery is evident in areas, and we know trees will absorb some of the nitrogen nasties that appear in our polluted atmospheres, then we find actually lower asthma rates among young children. In other words, there's different ways we could tackle this. Will you share this information? Will you maybe, if you're a school governor or a parent of the school, talk to other people about it? Will you start to get your neighbours, maybe your local councillor involved? At different levels, these are political skills, different approaches to bringing about positive change in some kind of way. And I hope just by showcasing this particular example, it shows where people can start out. If you have been so motivated because of the tragic loss of a loved one, as was the case with Rosamond and her daughter Ella, then clearly there's powerful motivation there. But all of us are going to be affected in some kind of way by the kind of things that are happening. So we're going to hear a bit more about climate change. And it's great to see members of the BPS, British Psychological Society Climate Emergency Action Group, here today. So I'll be interested to hear sort of more in some of the questions in chat later on. But if you do want to bring about change, whether it's in relation to something to do with the environmental crisis we're going through, or perhaps something in your workplace and your community, what are the 4 steps? And if you look at the work of a number of people who look in this area about policy change, as an individual citizen, it is possible to bring together stakeholders, people who are interested. There may be other members of the public, part of your community. They may equally be local political figures or national ones. Who knows? Very often you should get a letter back from your MP in relation to a pressing issue that others will be interested in. Find out what they think. Is there a way of developing a shared understanding around the issue? If it's a local planning application, for example, that means taking down a number of trees that perhaps don't need to be taken down, is there some way of working with the developers and local council to generate a more positive solution rather than simply go, that's the way it is, I give up? I don't think we're in a position where we can give up. We don't have an option. We need to somehow work together to promote the kind of change alongside the housing that we know many people will need. So are there ways of aligning your solution so that it helps with the particular problem? And can we exact firm commitments from people? And I know in a year when there's a general election in the United Kingdom, people think, well, you can't guarantee politicians will do what they say. Sure. But are there ways in which, when it comes to the kind of change you want, that people can be accountable for that in some kind of way? And if somebody goes, oh, we're not going to do that, there'll be a group of people that go, hang on a minute, we agreed this beforehand. There should be some accountability. These are the steps that people describe when talking about generating will, the will to kind of bring about change. And it's something you're going to hear more about, I think, from Joel in a few moments. So if you're motivated by anything I've said there, or you want to get in touch, you have any queries, that's my email address on the screen, a.weinberg@salford.ac.uk. There's also the link to the political psychology section of the BPS. And below, links to a couple of articles for our political psychology bulletin that members have written about political skills, either used in everyday life, one there by Naomi Havratin, and also around something more organizational to combat the climate emergency, written by Roger Paxton. So there you go. If you need references, because we all need references sometimes, and you want to find out more about what I've been saying there, thank you very much indeed for listening. I'm happy to take questions, either a couple of comments now, please pop them in the chat. Or in which case I will, if not, I will happily hand over to Joel to hear what he has to say. Joel, I hope you're there. You can hear me all right?
I am. Let's try this.
Wonderful.
Sharing malarkey.
Wonderful. I will introduce you while you're trying that out. And so Dr. John Montgomery, ladies and gentlemen, is a lecturer in management at the University of Kent. And his PhD thesis, and I think the topic he's going to talk about, as you can see, is actually around political reasoning amongst council leaders. So again, an insight into politicians, which we all need at this time. Joel, over to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Can I just get a thumbs up? We're all good with the presentation. Excellent. Thank you, guys. Okay, so as Ashley introduced, I'm John Montgomery. I'm in Kent at the moment. The weather is actually quite nice today, which is different from what it has been. So I will talk about my PhD today, a snapshot really of my PhD work, but something that I feel will be useful for this seminar. So whereas Ashley was talking about kind of organizational politics and big P politics, my focus, being a management scholar, is very much on the kind of organizational politics. So I just thought I'd introduce that literature quickly first. So we have Weinberg, who introduced the concept of organizational politics as this informal, unofficial, behind-the-scenes efforts to sell ideas, influence, and it's been treated in three main ways in the literature. So what we hear in wider society and what we hear in our kind of day-to-day life within organizations is that politics is this negative phenomenon. I'm really pleased that Ashley's talk introduced some positive elements as well, because it's important that we start addressing that. There has been some recent research which emphasizes politics as a positive phenomenon. So this is Leader Political Support by Ellen, who introduces that some leaders act politically to benefit their followers, i.e. a manager might act politically to benefit their team, or a leader within an organization acts politically on behalf of their organization. Some scholars seek to position politics as a neutral phenomenon. This is where political skill is at the moment, where we have these various skills that people can enact. Ashley talks about the 4 dimensions: networking, apparent sincerity, etc. And it in essence depends on the actor. Now, my research kind of almost takes a slight step back and says, well, if we're looking at skill, we also need to look at the motivation to act politically. We need to ensure that we have a good understanding of that political will, which Ashley also mentioned. So that's kind of what's missing. It's quite interesting because in 1985, 1983, Weinberg introduced political skill and political will at the same time. But political skill has over 3,000 articles in my PhD thesis, which Ashley was there with me. There was only about 15 articles specifically looking at political will. The research trajectory is very different. So political will is the motivation to engage in strategic goal-directed behavior that advances the personal agenda and objectives of the actor that inherently involves the risk of relational reputational capital. So why is my study important? Well, a lot is known about political skill, but far less is known about why individuals engage in political activity at work. Understanding these motivations can provide insight into the processes that guide these leaders in playing politics for personal gain or for collective good. That's an important component. I don't want to go over the literature in too much detail because I know I'll run out of time, but it has been addressed in political science, where they treat political motivation as a collective phenomenon, i.e. we bound political actors, i.e. politicians or local councillors together as decision makers and look at their motivation. In political science, they actively reject looking at individual motivations. They say, unless we live in a totalitarian state, there's no point in looking at an individual's motivation. In management, we look at it from an individual perspective. It's often been treated as a proxy, as a trait or a disposition, i.e. we are motivated by playing a political game for the self, or we are motivated by playing a political game for others. Or various other different elements such as need for power, etc. There has been some work which has extended that thought process that said that it's not just a trait or a disposition in us. It can adapt over time. Our political motivation can adapt and change within contexts such as Treadway, suggesting that we evaluate risk within our organization. So we look at how strong our manager is, we have a look at the organizational climate and then make decisions on why we engage in political motivation. And Doldal looked at how political motivation changes from a junior, middle to a senior level. i.e. at junior level, we are very naive in our political motivation. At senior level, we leverage that political motivation. It's very similar to what I found. The issue is that there's been an absence of looking at the reasoning, the actual specific reasoning, the context-specific political reasoning behind leaders' political motivation. i.e., what are the underlying drivers of organizational politics? My paper seeks to address this. So it looks at and borrows a concept from political science, i.e. political reasoning, the seeking, processing, and drawing inferences from information, and qualitatively looks at local councils. So I looked at local councils throughout the UK, from Nottingham to Devon to Kent. It was COVID, so we all moved online. That gave me an opportunity to explore a little wider. I had a really strong sample in terms of I had 10 councillors in each bracket. Councillors were ranged from first term councillors to councillors that were leading councils, i.e. leaders of councils, and I also looked at officers. This was quite important. So I looked at kind of your managerial level officers, and I also interviewed chief executives and heads of department that were running the legal team, the IT team, the planning, etc. within these local councils. This is important because I felt like this would allow me to look at the political motivations of traditional employees, i.e. officers who were neutral, but also politicians. What were their motivations, and are they similar or are they different? Do they develop or do they change differently? Are the reasoning that they identify for their political motivations same or different? And then obviously it's in a very similar context. They were all local councils. I know you can barely see this. So this is my template analysis. I'm just showing it to show that I did the work. I'm not going to go through every code. It will take far too long. What I did find is that officers that were meant to be neutral in local governments morphed from a very functional outlook, a functional motivation. They're engaging in organizational politics to help the tasks that they're involved in, but they were incredibly defensive. Whereas in a lot of the literature, we suggest that people are motivated by self-interest to gain power or to gain resources. That is not what I found. Officers were motivated to engage in political politics to avoid being seen as difficult, to avoid being seen as a problem, to deferentially and defensively protect themselves. But it was self-serving. Senior officers, however, were overly self-serving, very much similar to how you'd imagine the kind of Machiavelli at times. Machiavelli behaviors were motivated to control the council in ways that they saw fit. I had one example where there was a really good example of someone very high up in a council that managed to directly influence some various different councillors to make sure that they engaged in the agenda that they saw fit. That was very self-serving. But what I saw throughout my sample from junior to senior was an increase in benevolent motivation, i.e. a motivation to work on behalf of others, be it the staff, be it the entire council. Now, we can put this down to a few things. We can say this is an increase in knowledge, an increase in the perception of power. We can put it down to the actual power, the bureaucratic rationality. They are in a position of power, and thus they want to act politically on behalf of their team, which is great for their team, i.e. benevolent, but it's also quite good for themselves. Right? If their team are fulfilling and gaining resources, the team are doing better, the individuals, but also themselves. So there's an element of formalized responsibility to benevolent motivation that might not just be trait-like. It might just not be that we have benevolent people and self-serving individuals. It might be something that we need to do within our councils. But let's look at the fun stuff, the councillors. Again, I included the template analysis so you can see I can do the work. I know you can't see this. This was really interesting. So we had junior officers starting as self-serving, to the senior officers becoming more benevolent. It flipped with councillors. Councillors, political motivation, i.e. their motivation to engage in politics, started out as incredibly benevolent. They wanted to engage in casework. They wanted to provide a voice for their constituents. They very rarely talked about any self-serving notions instead of kind of very low-scale task efficiency. They were quite naive. in their risk evaluation. They were evaluating risk, but it was a kind of naive perspective. As we moved up the ranks, we became more very savvy in terms of our risk evaluation, but we also, the counselors became much more self-serving. I had counselors tell me about the projects that they're engaging in were to ensure that they left a legacy behind it within the local area. They were looking to influence high scale, roads, stadiums, leisure facilities, sorry. And that was, I wanted to engage in this because I wanted to be the individual behind that movement. It just wasn't there in the junior counselors. Now, I'm sure we can reflect on, I know the audience will probably want to reflect on slightly in terms of when we're thinking about our votes to cast, if we are looking at people that have been there for a long time in terms of those implications. From a management perspective, haven't quite looked at those as much in terms of the PhD, but it is something I'm really interested in, i.e. the implications for actual general elections and local elections, how motivations change across seniority. Okay, so I think I'm probably near off at running out of time. But what are my contributions to the study for the literature? So we are proposing political reasoning as a construct that departs from the external literature, i.e. it's not just stable, it changes over time. We can see that from our junior to middle to senior level individuals across samples. We introduce a social cognitive perspective of political reasoning to highlight that there are explicit reasoning behind individuals' actions influenced by their evaluation of their environment. So they are considering the risk implications. They are thinking about whether they can engage in this. They are considering their power, etc. Contribution 2, an inductive qualitative stance. A lot of the literature has been quantitative, so I've kind of took a step back and thought, well, okay, we have these self-serving and benevolent components to our political motivation understanding, but can we look at that in less distinctive terms? People are probably benevolent and self-serving often at the same time. We can have a multifaceted reasoning behind our actions to engage in this organizational arena. And contribution 3, I feel like the setting of local councils, I'm calling it an extreme setting, was ideal for theory development of the political workspace. It allowed me to have a juxtaposition between these traditional office workers engaging in office politics like we all do all the time, just as Ashley suggested at the start of his talk, and those who engage in politics as their job, i.e. the politicians, and how they are similar, but also very distinctive at the same time. So thank you very much. I think that's probably about my time, so I appreciate everybody listening. Thank you.
Joel, thank you very much indeed. A really interesting insight into how politics works. It's brilliant. Congratulations again on your thesis and all that's coming out from it. I'm sure there'll be publications for people to be cottoning onto very soon. And thank you all for being here, the comments in the chat, and we're looking forward to more discussion around the issues that have been raised there. Joel, thank you very much. Just while you were talking, Tony, thank you very much for your comments in there. Suggesting Michael Grove said that people of the country have had enough of experts, which means it's harder to use evidence to get policy change. I don't know if you have a quick comeback on that, Joel, based on what you've seen there before we go to Antonio.
The people of this country have had enough of it. Means I think it's harder and harder to use evidence to get policy change. What alternatives are? Alternatives is a very tricky question. I always think that we should be using as much evidence as possible to engage in any policy changes. I'll try and come back at the end with a good example of an alternative, but we'll see.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid my cheeky response is it's possible the people of the UK may have had enough of Michael Gove, but that's just other viewpoints are available, I should add, for the future. And if you're listening to this, Michael, no offense intended. Antonio, let's turn to you. You're, I know, a member of the BPS Climate Emergency Action Group and also the political psychology section, a very valuable member of its committee. So thank you very much for joining us here, Antonio, for all your help with this. You've done a wonderful sweep of history here to tell us why we are where we are and looking forward to hearing this and all that it means. So feel free to share your slides. We saw them briefly there.
Hello, Ashley. Thank you. Well, can you see my presentation?
Briefly, it was there, Antonio. Do click again. I'm thinking, yes, there you go. So I can see the slide and the deck of slides down the left-hand side. If you want to enlarge,
let me try one more time because I think I did something wrong.
it's an impressive look back over 100 years you encapsulated here, Antonio. I'm in awe.
Well, sorry for that. Well, before I start, I would like to thank you for. Can you see my presentation now? No?
Perfect. Over to you, Antonio.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So good evening, everyone. Congratulations for your presentations. It was really amazing. And first of all, I would like to thank you for having me, for giving me the opportunity to participate on this panel. And to be honest, I prepared another presentation for this webinar, but after the results of European Union's election, I decided to rewrite it from a different perspective, because I believe one political skill is to understand the history and predict the future. So we are going to discuss about the psychological dynamics between political parties and voters, comparing two significant periods, the decade of 1930s and the 2K14. Our focus will be on economic influences and the rise of far-right parties. This comparison aims to provide insights into how economic distress shapes voter behavior and the appeal of radical ideologies. To begin, let's outline what we will cover today. We'll start with an overview of the two periods under study, the interwar years of 1920 to 1930s, and the current political landscape into 2K24. We will highlight how the economic condition influenced voter behaviors during these times, leading to the rise of the far-right parties. Our objective is to identify the psychological patterns that emerge during periods of economic distress and understand the factors that drive voters toward far-right ideologies. This understanding can help us develop strategies to address political extremism in contemporary society. Historical context. First, let's set the historical context of the decade of 1930s. After World War I, Europe was left in a state of turmoil. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh reparations to Germany, leading to economic hardship and political instability. The Great Depression, starting in 1929, further exacerbated these conditions, causing widespread unemployment, poverty, social unrest, and many suicides. These economic and political challenges created an environment ripe for the rise of extremist movements. People were desperate for solutions and stability, which set the stage for the emergence of far-right parties like the Nazi Party in Germany and the Fascist Party in Italy. During this tumultuous period, far-right parties gained significant traction. The Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler, and Fascist Party under Benito Mussolini capitalized the widespread discontent. These parties promised national revival, economic recovery, and social order, appealing to a population struggling with economic despair and political chaos. They used propaganda effectively to galvanize support, portraying themselves as the saviors of the nations. Understanding the psychological mechanism they employed is crucial to grasp why they gained such widespread support. Several key psychological mechanisms explain the attraction to far-right parties during times of economic distress. First, scapegoating involves blaming minorities or external entities for economic problems, which helps unite a distressed population against a common enemy. This creates a sense of solidarity and directs anger away from the government of ruling class. Second, authoritarianism becomes more appealing during periods of instability. People desire strong leadership and decisive action to restore order and security. This leads to increased support for the parties that promise law, order, and rapid economic recovery. Third, in-group and out-group dynamics play a significant role. These dynamics foster a sense of belonging among supporters while demonizing those perceived as outsiders. This not only strengthens a group identity, but also justifies aggressive policies against the out-group. Far forward to our era, 2K24, we find a different but equally challenging global context. Today's political landscape is shaped by the lingering effects of COVID-19 pandemic, rapid technological advancements, and globalization. These factors have contributed to significant economic insecurity, job displacement, and social anxiety. Many people feel left behind by the pace of the change and the widening gap between the wealthy and the rest of the population. This environment has led to increased political polarization, with far-right parties gaining traction by exploiting these insecurities. In this modern context, far-right parties continue to leverage economic discontent to gain support. They promise protectionism, job security, and return to traditional values, appealing to those who feel marginalized by the current economic system. Today's far-right movements are adept at using digital tools and social media to spread their message, creating echo chambers that reinforce their narratives. They exploit information overload and misinformation to sow confusion and construct, further polarizing the electorate. Let's explore the psychological mechanisms they use in more detail. Modern psychological mechanisms include the information overload and misinformation. In the digital age, voters are bombarded with information, making it difficult to discern truth from falsehood. Far-right parties exploit this by creating echo chambers, where their narratives are constantly reinforced, isolating their supporters from opposing viewpoints. Identity politics is another powerful tool. Far-right parties appeal to voters' sense of cultural and national identity, which is often threatened by rapid social and demographic changes. They promise to protect these identities, which resonates deeply with their base. Lastly, fear of change is a significant factor. Rapid technological advancements and social changes create uncertainty and fear. Far-right parties capitalize on this fear, promising to protect traditional values and ways of life, thus providing a sense of stability in a rapidly changing world. When we compare these two periods, we can see consistent patterns where economic distress drives radical support and clear, decisive solutions have a strong psychological appeal. However, the tool and context differ. In the decade of 1930s, propaganda was spread through traditional media like newspapers and rallies. Today, digital media and social platforms play a crucial role in spreading far-right ideologies. Despite these differences, the underlying psychological appeal remains the same, offering simple solutions to complex problems and providing a sense of community and identity. Understanding these patterns is essential for addressing political extremism. By recognizing the psychological dynamics that drive voter behavior, we can develop more effective strategies to counter the appeal of far-right parties. Ensuring economic stability and addressing social insecurities are crucial steps in this direction. Additionally, promoting media literacy and critical thinking can help mitigate the impact of misinformation. Building social cohesion and fostering inclusive identities can counter the divisive tactics of far-right movements. To sum up, we have mentioned how economic and psychological factors influence voter behavior across different eras. Despite varying contexts, the psychological appeal of far-right ideologies remain consistent during times of economic distress. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for developing strategies to counter political extremism. Continued research on these topics is essential as it is development of policies that promote economic stability and social cohesion. Well, I adore the Greek mythology, so I try to have my last slide with this myth of Pandora and hope. So as we conclude today, I'd like to share a story for ancient Greek mythology, and that beautifully encapsulates the theme of hope in the face of adversity. Pandora, the first woman created by the gods, was given a box and instructed never to open it. Yet, driven by curiosity, she did it. And in doing so, unleashed all the evils and hardships upon the world. But at the very bottom of the box lay one last thing, hope. This myth reminds us that no matter the challenges and difficulties we encounter in our research or our personal lives, hope remains. It is a powerful force that inspires us to keep striving, to keep believing, and to continue pushing the boundaries of knowledge and understanding. As we move forward, let us hold on to hope. It is this hope that will guide us through our trials, fuel our perseverance, and ultimately lead us to new discoveries and progress. Well, thank you for your attention, and let's continue our journey with hope in our hearts. Thank you. And I have some references here.
Just wanted to say thank you so much, Antonio. Absolutely wonderful. Brilliant. I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much indeed. Very thought-provoking. And thank you for giving us hope.
The gift of hope.
I'm always learning. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. There you go, you see. One of those things I should know. It didn't, and I didn't. So thank you for that. There you go. What a good place to put hope as well at the bottom of the box. I like that idea. Yeah.
It's amazing that there are so many evils, so many bad things, but this is where hope lives. So this is what I was thinking, that one basic political skill is to understand where are the problems and give not only hope to people and solutions.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that. And I hope you're seeing comments in the chat there as well. Joel's thoughts on that. And thank you all for your comments in the chat. Quite a few things to sort of go at there, really. There was a specific question, Antonio, just for you, if I may. It was from Tony about sort of the links between what you were saying and colonialism and neo-colonialism as well. Tony makes reference to sort of white malice and the role of European and American forces in the way the liberation of African countries was disrupted. Obviously, liberation followed enslavement in the first place. So yeah, just wondered if some of what you were saying there links to that and where we're at now, possibly. I don't know.
Well, I'm not aware about this one, but I just clicked on the link. And well, I think that history always has to teach us something. And whatever happens here today might happen before 100 years, or medieval times. So we are all human beings, and some people just need to conquer other people. Some other people just want to be leaders and help other people in their society or their nation. So the big difference is that I'm not aware of this colonialism. Sorry, not Tony, for this, but I truly believe that the Earth, climate change happens, war happens, the disrespect for other people happens, and we are still talking about theories. The praxis and actions should happen right now, I think.
Thank you very much, Antonio. And yeah, I think given the involvement, as you mentioned, the sort of far right there, with some leaders who tend to be from the far right denying that there's a climate challenge, has been clearly something that's been relevant. But I've noticed that since the re-election of President Lula in Brazil, that the level of deforestation has declined by a significant percentage. So it shows that politicians with a particular mindset can make a real positive difference there. I'm mindful that everyone may well have things to say. Urs, welcome to you. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here and listening. You're hearing a series of presentations, and now it's time for discussion around sort of political skills. If I may, just very quickly, Tony raised a question earlier on about the British Psychological Society and how it has some trepidation with getting involved in anything political. I hope the establishment of the section Political Psychology and the fact that there are so many of us interested in bringing about positive change, those who are not here as well as who are, suggests that it will take more than one organization to prevent the expression of political will. And I think the BPS is hopefully starting to recognize its responsibilities, that and being neutral to the point where there is inaction is a political action in itself, I guess. But Roger, let's bring you in and kick off the discussions.
Thanks, Ashley. I just wanted to respond to the to Tony's point, which you've just spoken for us. Tony, it isn't true that the BPS is shy of any political action. Strictly speaking, I think they're nervous about party political stances. And it's quite obvious that the BPS as an organization does take, broadly speaking, political stances. There's the campaign, the current campaign to do with mental health services, isn't there, for instance? And of course, the whole establishment of the Climate and Environment Action Coordinating Group is all to do with politics in the sense of influencing wide-ranging social policies and so on. It's quite explicit in the terms of reference of that group and in the work we're doing. It's very political, isn't it? And Tony, I think you missed the last meeting of the group in which we discussed the terms of reference, and there was the point that we were a bit stuck on, which was to do with being political, saying we shouldn't be political. And we clarified that in discussion and said, no, we don't want to be party political, but we did put in a much more positive, expanded point, which refers to the BPS Royal Charter. And there is in the Royal Charter a statement which is to do with the societies supporting the wider work of the members. I can't remember the wording. And of course, Tony, you'll be very familiar with the terms of reference and the mission statement of the European Federation of Psychologists Associations, EFBA, which is explicitly about doing good in the world, using psychology to do good in the world, which is, again, all about politics in the broadest sense. So, Tony, I think you, in a way, are a bit too pessimistic about the BPS and its ability to be political.
Thank you very much indeed, Roger. Tony, I see your hand up, so do come back on this.
Yeah, I was just I accept all that. The problem is that I've been told explicitly that something is political, so the BPS can't have anything to do with it. Whereas the BPS is clearly a political organization in all sorts of ways, as the sort of thing that Roger talks about. And I think it goes back to the discussion that you raised at the beginning about whether politics is a bad thing. That's why I think this is an interesting area that maybe political psychology can have something to do, some way in which we can help. Because I think, I can't remember whether I missed the last meeting, maybe I did. I can't remember which meetings I'm at and which I'm not. But I'm glad you had a good discussion, because I think we need to make politics a good thing. As you say, that the BPS can really be politically effective and do some really good political things. So if the you know, the narrative about this with the society is changing, I'm very pleased with that. I'm still not going to hold my breath that it'll be a big transformation, but maybe we're on the right way, on the right road.
Tony, thank you very much indeed. And yeah, Terry has her hand up. So Terry, you're chairing the Climate Emergency Action Group.
I chair this group. It's I'm not going to comment on what the others have been talking about, because I think we resolved that issue at the last meeting. But I wanted to make a few comments on, I know the three papers were all, three inputs were all very different, and I had responses to each one, and I'm not quite sure where to start. But let me take the one about Joel's one about local government. I was a council officer in a previous life in Camden Council, where I was head of the economic development unit. So I probably was a senior officer, one of the senior people you're talking about. I must say it was very hard not to be sucked into corners in pubs late at night, politicking with one group or another, because that's where they tended to meet after the council meetings. So I got very political with a small p, I suppose, and I probably maneuvered quite a few things in my time, even though I was an officer. But I think the thing that struck me, I moved on from that, and I worked a lot then with organization cultures and leadership and that kind of stuff. And one thing that struck me was about women in organizations. I found it fascinating that a lot of women didn't want to proceed to senior positions because they said it was too political, and that they didn't want to get involved in organizational politics because they found that very off-putting. And I must say that I was trying to encourage them to get involved at senior levels, because it wasn't about politics, it was about power. And I think there's a difference between politics and power. And a lot of the time people confuse it. If you're not willing to engage with power and use your influence and move in a powerful way, I don't think you're going to make much social change. And I don't think that certainly those of us involved in the climate arena are going to make much change unless we actually address the issue of power and power imbalances in society and use our power for the greater good. And so that's why I'm involved in the climate issues. And to take the final speaker, Antonio, who's also on the climate committee. Don't see you that much, Antonio, by the way. If you'd like to come to the next meeting, please. Because you've got a lot to offer. I didn't realize it until I heard you talk this morning. The issue of which worries me a great deal at the moment, wearing another hat, is the rise of the right and the rise of fascism. And I read an interesting book recently by the late Madeleine Albright, where she was predicting that Donald Trump would bring in fascism in the United States, which we're now starting to see, and that we're actually seeing the rise again back in Europe. And it makes me think, from a psychological perspective, have we lost any sort of collective memory of what happened 4 years ago in the United States and what happened, 60 or 70 years ago in Europe, that we're seeing the whole thing play out again. And it's quite depressing at one level, that we don't have any memory of the consequences and the impacts of such pernicious movements on people and people's well-being and psychology and livelihoods and so on. So there's part of me that says, what can we do to act, and it may be political, or maybe using power, but using influence. But and finally, I just want to say about climate anxiety. The antidote to anxiety is action. And I always say to people, if you're worried about it, do something about it. And even if it's only a small thing, do something. Because action, and even with, I'm just watching a piece of news this morning. I'll finish with this because it's a long-winded kind of diatribe. But I was watching a piece of news this morning from a neurosurgeon on CNN, which I'm afraid I'm a bit addicted to, but then I'm probably in an echo chamber there, where he was talking about the antidote to dementia is movement. And movement with somebody rather than on your own. So go for a walk and talk is the biggest antidote to dementia. And so the antidote to inertia, to allowing, as Edmund Burke is reported to have said, is for good men to do nothing. And so I think we have a responsibility to be political, to use our power. I think political has become a dirty word. Political in its true sense, come back to you, Aisling, where we started, is that it's not neutral, but it is about doing something, and it's about social change, and it's about change generally. And for that reason, I use it very carefully. I use it a lot, but I don't think the BPS is apolitical. I think it to be what it purports to be, it has to act politically, but not in party politics, which is where we made the distinction at the last meeting. Having said all that, I'll shut up.
Terry, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Important to hear from everybody here, including yourself. And I think what you're saying also echoes with something that Tony was writing in the chat earlier on about profound societal change. And Antonio, you were talking about that in your talk as well. It's kind of, how do we do that? What are the psychological processes involved? And I think sort of taking that further and drilling that down is, yes, we will, I think, see an increasing amount of far-right thinking if we characterize it that way, because of the need for clarity Antonio describes. If people feel insecure, where do they tend to drift? So it's, I think, then incumbent on the whole political spectrum to say, well, actually, we've got some very clear ideas, but the left will tend to discuss things and want to hear everyone's views, which means the person who on the far right goes, this is my way or no other way, will tend to just be a little quicker, if not, not right in that sense. So it's kind of, how do we bring people together? And Tony's point about earlier, mentioned about conceptualizing the political process. Maybe you want to say something on that. Tony, we only have a couple of minutes left. Keen to hear others' views, thoughts in the chat. Tony, very quickly from you.
Very quickly, yeah. I absolutely, Madeleine Albright's book, I was looking up, I read that when it first came out in 2018, and it's absolutely prescient. She sees what's coming. It's really scary, actually, because she's been involved in lots of stuff. But what I was going to say is there's things called social tipping points that Tim Lenton at Exeter, where I'm based some of the time, has been working on this idea that you can get, and you're talking about that pollution example, it's somebody produces something that makes a lot of people interested, it goes viral. How do we get those sorts of big changes, quick changes? That's what we're looking for. And I think the right wing have got a good idea about how they do that. Dog whistle stuff is how they do it. And Trump has learned from the people who run wrestling matches, It's really awful, but nevertheless, that's how it works. So to get big, good changes, we have to really understand about how that whole psychology works, I think.
Absolutely. And it is that sort of trade-off between speed and the existing slow processes we have that is one of the key challenges there within political institutions. So it's wonderful that within this cyberspace room that we're all in right now, we're able to have this discussion, share these thoughts. And I'm mindful, sadly, of time, but is there any pressing thoughts anyone wants to share at this time? Raise a hand, pop something in the chat. Otherwise, I fear, because I know everyone has other things to go on to, I will draw things to a close with thanks to every one of you. Thanks to our presenters today for sharing your thoughts. Thanks to the reactions from those of you in the audience for engaging with those and sharing your thoughts and concerns and where we need to go, which I think is forwards with hope. Antonio, if we borrow that from Pandora's box, Joel with political skills, Terry with the insights into how we get those decisions made, whether it's in dark corners or in the open light of day, and Roger for championing that the BPS can do and should do these things, and Tony, your encouragement. Laura, thank you for being here. Selma, Urs, Olawale, Kez, thank you very much indeed for sharing this, and Suzanne for coordinating, housekeeping, recording. Thank you all very much indeed, and take care. Farewell for now.
Thanks, Ashley. Bye.